The first thing you want to do with your DeWalt pull saw is add bar oil to the tank. Don't even put the battery in until you have done this. This is the chain tensioning multi-tool. Welcome, fellow homeowners and landscaping enthusiasts. I know that you take great pride in the appearance of your property and are willing to invest in tools to keep it looking great. This video is intended for beginners buying their first chainsaw. This isn't an unboxing video or an explanation of features. There are plenty of those that are pretty good. Make no mistake, a pole chainsaw is a chainsaw. Chainsaws are powerful, therefore they are useful. Chainsaws are powerful, therefore they are dangerous. Only use one if you can accept the risk. Thousands of people a year in emergency rooms wish they hadn't. My boss nearly cut off his thumb with a chainsaw. The kickback happened in the blink of an eye. The maintenance of a chainsaw is different than many other tools. Maybe you used your brother-in-law's chainsaw but never added oil to it, adjusted the chain tension, or sharpened it. If you're an experienced chainsaw owner, you can turn off the sound and watch the pretty pictures and add your own brilliant narrative to it. I'm sure some owners will never adjust or sharpen the chain or clean wood chips out from under the sprocket cover. Let me know in the comments how many months or battery charges you went with no maintenance at all, and the size of the battery. But if you want to keep it maintained and running until the wheels fall off, this information is for you. You know how they say, I wish I knew then what I know now? Well, this is your chance to know now. Another cliche, I don't know what I don't know. Well, at minimum, you can know what you don't know, and there are dozens of really great chainsaw videos on YouTube that will help you out. I'm just a homeowner, not one and some of these guys are full-time professionals. Start off by reading the manual. It has great and necessary information on safety and operation of the tool. I'm not going to read it to you line by line, including all 3 pages on the care and feeding of the battery. You mostly cut with the bottom of the bar, and that will slightly tug the tool away from you up against the bumper knuckles. I wouldn't exactly call them bumper spikes or dogs. Cutting with the top of the bar will push the chainsaw toward you. Even worse, it will move the wood toward the top tip of the bar. I don't want you to get into any bad habits that will come back to bite you when you get a regular chainsaw. You never want to engage the top tip of the bar in wood. This can cause a serious kickback and injury. This pole chainsaw does not have a chain brake. You need to be exerting forward force when you cut with the top of the chain. This is a Stihl chain sharpening kit you can buy on Amazon. This is the file with guide. This is the depth guide gauge. This is the file to lower the depth guide. I actually use an Oregon depth guide gauge and not this one. Let's adjust the chain tension. Always remove the battery or the whole handle assembly before doing any work on the pole saw. We will use the 5mm drive to loosen the 2 hex bolts on the chain sprocket cover. The adjustment screw can be seen on the other side. Use the flathead end of the multi-tool for this. It also fits the 5mm hex head once it is finger tight. Screw the adjuster in for tighter, out for looser. The manual says the tension is correct when the saw chain snaps back after being pulled an 1/8 inch, 3mm, away from the guide bar. Once the tension is correct, tighten the sprocket cover hex bolts. Retech tension, it often moves a bit. To recap the chain tensioning steps, loosen the sprocket cover hex bolts, adjust the tension with the screwdriver, and then tighten the sprocket cover hex bolts. This is the chain cutter facing away from you. Connecting link, depth guide, cutter facing toward you, chisel, gullet, depth guide and cutting depth. You file on the top of the chain but the cutters are mostly used when they roll around to the bottom of the chain. Note that the depth guide is closer to the motor, just across the gullet from the chisel. The chain can be put on the right way or the wrong way. Do it the right way. This is the Stihl file with guide bought on Amazon. I replaced the file with a 4.5mm diameter organ file to match the chain. You can turn the file guide so that you're not always filing with the same side. Stihl does make an excellent 2-in-1 easy file chainsaw chain sharpener that I have used on other chainsaws, but I can't determine if it would work on this pole saw. Let me know in the comments either way if you have tried it. Stihl round file with guide. Note the handy 30-degree angle markings on the top to remind you of the correct angle to file the chisel. My $50 USB microscope camera. A stand really helps when using magnification. Round file, no guide. I started out filing this way, but the file kept slipping over the chisel. I did file the heck out of the gullet. I barely touched the chisel. An actual chisel. It is hard to control the depth. A plane has much better depth control. Wood chips. Flat surface and adjustable chisel depth. Cutter chisel and chainsaw chisel. Using a magnifying glass and a flashlight to check the chisel. Oregon 25,000th depth guide. The manual says, keep cutting edge sharp and clean for best performance. And chain sharpening services are available from your nearest DeWalt service center. That's it. Actually, the sharper your chain is, the less horsepower you need. A dull chain needs a lot of horsepower. Keep it sharp. Put the hole in the center over the depth guide and snug up against one end. Use the flat end of the file to check if the depth guide is sticking out of the hole. I'll pretend that the depth guide is sticking out and needs to be filed. I usually do 8 to 10 strokes and check it again. Chain bar slot pick or chainsaw, guide bar, rail trough cleaner. Shipping costs as much as the tool, so you may want to buy more than one. So easy, even a husband could do it. We'll clamp the head assembly in a vise, being careful to make sure that the chain can move. Remember, always take out the battery when working on a chainsaw. Bar oil is delivered to the chain when the motor is running. The chips produced by the cutter go under the sprocket cover, around the sprocket, and inject out the top. The sprocket cover is full of chips. I personally burned out a DeWalt chainsaw by not cleaning out chips from under the sprocket cover. The bar oil could not get to the chain and it got very hot and dry. The bar and chain eventually bound up and locked up. I replaced them, and less than a battery charge later, the motor burned up. A very expensive lesson. Maybe you'll have better luck with your specific chips. Every full battery charge, I add bar oil, sharpen the chain, file the depth guide as needed, clean out the bar groove with the pick, and clean out under the sprocket cover. Your schedule could be different. We will clean the chips out from under the sprocket cover. First, we remove the 2 sprocket cover hex bolts. The included L-shaped flat blade screwdriver fits the bolts perfectly once they are finger tight. I'll use a T-handle drive to speed things up. I will wipe off the chips under the sprocket cover. I only cut a few branches since the last time I did this. We will clean the chips off the sprocket area on the motor head assembly. You can use a cotton towel, a flat blade screwdriver, or a leaf blower. You are wearing eye protection, aren't you? It is helpful to recognize a few items when installing the bar chain back on the motor head assembly. The tension pin goes through the top hole in the bar assembly. There are 2 symmetric holes around the bar slot so that you can flip the bar over to even out wear. The bar slot fits over the case ridge. The chain needs to go over the sprocket. It is helpful to loosen the chain tension so that the chain can easily go over the sprocket. You didn't expect me to reveal the secret method to putting on the bar, did you? Consider it an agility test. Hope you get an A. Put the sprocket cover back on. Check that the chain is moving smoothly around the sprocket before you tighten the bolts back down finger tight. Tighten the chain tension back up. The tension can change a bit when you tighten down the sprocket bolts. Recheck the tension after tightening down the 2 bolts. I rub my fingers together after checking the chain tension to make sure they have an oily residue on them. This means that the bar is oiled. Let's talk about what happens when you exert force on a branch or rod of wood. Bent up, the top is in expansion. Some people call it tension. The bottom side is in compression or being squeezed together. Bent down, the top side is in compression and the bottom side is in expansion. This is what normally happens when you cut with a saw from top to bottom when the rod is supported on both ends. A tree branch is attached to the trunk on one side and bent down somewhere along its length. The top starts in expansion and the bottom is in compression. With a little bit of luck, the expansion will go all the way to the bottom by the time you cut through it. This is a Jameson Barracuda pruning saw. It cuts on the pole stroke. The width of the cut is often called the kerf. Note that the kerf is wider than the thickness of the blade. This is because every other cutting tooth is set slightly to the left or right. This allows the blade to move smoothly through the kerf without binding up. Sap or grunge on the blade can cause friction. This can be removed with orange cleaner and a cotton towel or an angle grinder with a fine surface preparation wheel. It doesn't matter if you are cutting wood with a handsaw, a table saw, a handheld circular saw, or a chainsaw. You want to end the cut with the kerf expanding. When the kerf is expanding as you finish the cut, the blade will not get trapped. If you have to cut through the wood in compression, start the cut in compression. Kerf compression will often trap the blade. The further you cut through the wood, the more likely this is to happen. The blade is hung up in the kerf and no longer cutting. If we push down on the log, the kerf just closes tighter. If we push up on the log, the kerf opens. I am using a Doka pole hook attachment on a standard extension pole. Pushing up or moving a branch around to relieve tension may untrap a stuck pole chainsaw. If the blade gets trapped, stop, take a deep breath, and ask why the kerf is in compression. Is there anything I can do to relieve this by moving the branch around? As a matter of fact, you should get in the habit before cutting any wood of asking, is the kerf going to open up as I cut through it? How can I support it to achieve this? A wedge is another common way of opening a kerf if you were bucking a branch laying on the ground. A wedge is useful if you need to saw just a bit further to complete a cut. Note that the branch is supported with a narrow gap and the ends are hanging out over the sides, a bit like our rod bent up. Hopefully the kerf will be in expansion the whole way as we cut through the branch. And indeed, the kerf opened as half the log fell to the ground. Let's look at the 3-cut method for cutting off a branch. Start with a middle cut on the bottom of the branch. Push the pole slightly forward to keep it from rolling to the dangerous top end of the bar. Cut about 1/3 of the way through. Make the second cut about 6 inches from the middle cut on the side away from the trunk, starting at the top and going all the way through. Make the third cut closer to the trunk, about 6 inches from the middle cut. Once again, cut all the way through, top to bottom. I am going for a collar cut here, which will I explain in just a moment. We are actually cutting a Y fork so that there is no stub left. This is a collar cut. There are many excellent YouTube videos you can watch on tree pruning that explain in greater detail. Here we have the piece with all 3 cuts. Wood splits easily down the length with the grain. Woodworkers call cutting down the grain ripping. Wood is more difficult to cut across the grain. This is called cross-cutting. Pole saws are used to cross-cut the vast majority of time. Note that when we did the second cut, it split before we finished the cut. This could have caused a really nasty wound on the branch. This split was stopped by the undercut. We then cut off this lightweight piece of wood with almost no splitting. A collar cut cuts like a ring that looks like a shirt collar. It is designed to heal well. The collar cut is a Goldilocks cut. You don't want to cut it too close or too far, but just right. Watch those pruning videos. This is a tree that had the branches split off in the wind. This may have had something to do with the 3 years of drought that we had. This left a very nasty wound on the tree. A collar cut should avoid this type of splitting, and the end should heal nicely. The manual states, do not use the pole saw to cut down trees. I totally agree. There are many excellent tree felling videos on YouTube. Watch a dozen of them. You should become familiar with many terms such as notch, back cut, holding wood, plunge cut, an advanced technique, leaner, and barber chair, a very bad thing. As always, start out small and progress to bigger trees as you get experience. By the time you fell your first dozen trees, you will understand why using a pole saw is a very bad idea. Get a regular chainsaw to fell trees. The large vertical branches are just like tree trunks, so don't cut them down either. Smaller 1-inch branches can be cut with suitable care. Remember, that branch 6 feet over your head has a newly cut, sharpened spear point on it and will fall rapidly to earth with little directional control. Use your pole saw, not a chainsaw and ladder. This highly accurate simulation shows why. The heavy, far end of the branch will hit the ground first. The other end will then knock you or the ladder to the ground. 18-foot Jameson pole saw with Barracuda blade headstock. The branch is probably about 15 or 16 foot high. You don't want to stand directly under the branch, but off to the side. The DeWalt pole saw trying to reach the area. I use manual pole saws far more than chain pole saws. Chain pole saws can do undercuts, which is why I own one. Some Jameson hand pruning saws and pole saw combinations. The supposed 15-foot reach of the DeWalt pole saw is a bit of a reach. I figure it to be more like 12 feet. This is the DeWalt pole saw compared to an 11-foot 9-inch pole. The original owners put up with my staying on their property.